The envelope came on a Thursday morning, slipped under the apartment door with no sound. Marcus Ellison spotted it while reaching for his cane, the pale yellow of official business impossible to mistake. His name was typed in blocky letters across the front. He picked it up slowly, his joints aching from the cold, and opened it with steady fingers. Inside was a summons, a court date, a violation of probation. He blinked twice at the letter, trying to focus on the wording. According to the document, he had failed to report a change of address, a condition of his probation from years past. The irony burned. He had moved only because he had no choice. The building he lived in, one of the last affordable complexes in South Fulton County, had been sold overnight. The new owner sent an eviction notice with a 10-day warning. Marcus barely had time to find another place, let alone notify anyone. His daughter, Naomi, stood in the kitchen pouring coffee when she heard him sigh. "What is it, Daddy?" she asked, coming over with 2 mugs. Marcus handed her the letter. Naomi read it in silence, her jaw tightening. "They're calling this a violation? Because you moved after they sold your building out from under you?" He gave a small nod. "And didn't tell them in time," he said quietly. "Though I did. Just not fast enough, I guess." Naomi paced the room. She was 32, sharp-tongued and fierce when it came to her father. She had watched him come home from war with broken bones and quieter eyes. She had watched the system ignore him, doctors rush through his appointments, officials forget his name. But this felt like a new low. "You need to fight this," she said. "I will," Marcus replied, smoothing the edges of the letter. "But I need to do it right." He opened the old wooden closet near the front door. Inside hung a single dark gray suit. He had worn it to weddings and funerals. It would serve again now. He held it up against his chest. It still fit. Mostly. "You shouldn't have to prove your humanity to them," Naomi muttered. Marcus folded the suit carefully and laid it across the back of the couch. "No," he said, "but I will." The next morning, they sat at the kitchen table, going over every document they could find. Discharge papers, VA letters, rent notices. Naomi helped organize it all, punching holes and slipping pages into a binder. As the court date drew closer, Marcus practiced walking with his cane, correcting his posture. Every step was a negotiation between pain and purpose. He did not want pity. He wanted to be understood. The courthouse loomed on the horizon, just beyond the morning fog. Inside it waited a system Marcus had long learned not to expect fairness from. But still he was going. Not for redemption, not for sympathy, but because dignity meant showing up, even when the world gave you every reason not to. The morning of the hearing, Marcus Ellison sat at the edge of his bed, staring down at his polished shoes. His left knee throbbed, a reminder of Fallujah that never quite faded. His hands, weathered and calloused, trembled slightly as he reached for his cane. Naomi stood nearby, her expression tight but calm, as she helped him button the last clasp of his shirt. They left the apartment before sunrise, carrying a leather binder stuffed with paperwork. Naomi insisted on driving. The bus was unreliable, and she didn't want to risk a delay. The old sedan rattled over potholes as the sun crept over the horizon. Marcus stared out the window in silence. In the quiet hum of the car, memories crept in uninvited. The heat of the desert, the sudden roar of an explosion, the flash of fire, then silence, deafening and complete. Marcus had been a sergeant. He had led men. On that day, he had pulled 2 of them from a burning Humvee with shrapnel lodged deep in his own thigh. Back home, the medals meant very little. He had waited 8 months for his first benefits check. The pain never left. Neither did the limp. "Are you okay?" Naomi asked, glancing over. "Just remembering," he said. At the courthouse, Marcus took a long breath before stepping out of the car. He gripped his cane, adjusted his suit jacket, and stood tall. The building towered above them, modern and cold. A place of decisions, not understanding. Inside, the metal detector beeped as he passed through slowly. Security gave him a brief glance, then looked away. No nod, no courtesy. Just another man with a cane. They found the courtroom listed on the summons and sat in the hallway outside it. Naomi clutched the binder in her lap. Marcus closed his eyes, breathing deeply. People passed them in suits, in uniforms, in silence. When the doors opened, they stepped in together. The courtroom smelled of old wood and recycled air. Rows of benches lined the back, half filled with spectators. Some were families. Some were strangers. But near the back, Marcus noticed two older men in military caps. Veterans. He didn't recognize them, but something about their presence steadied him. He lowered himself carefully into the defendant's seat. From across the room, he could see the bench where the judge would sit. Elevated, distant, symbolic. He had been in courtrooms before as a witness, as a petitioner. But never like this. Never as the accused. Naomi leaned over. "No matter what happens," she whispered. "You don't let them make you small." Marcus nodded once. "I won't." His file was already stacked among dozens on the clerk's desk. To them, he was just another name. Just another alleged violation. Not a man. Not a story. As the clerk called the court into session, Marcus folded his hands on the table before him. He didn't flinch. The door behind the bench opened with a faint creak, and the courtroom rose. Judge Deborah Whitmore stepped out, robed in deep black, her posture erect and movements precise. She took her seat without a glance at the gallery, eyes already scanning the first file in front of her. Her presence filled the room like a chill. Known for her ironclad adherence to law and procedure, Judge Whitmore was a fixture of the Fulton County courthouse. No nonsense. Unyielding. Efficient. Some admired her. Others feared her. But no one ignored her. She flipped through pages quickly, murmuring to her clerk without raising her voice. The courtroom settled into a hush as she looked up. Docket number 18 to 3127. Marcus Ellison, she said. Marcus adjusted his tie and pushed himself upright in his seat, spine straight despite the pain. Naomi placed the binder on the table, sliding it toward the defense attorney, who stood to acknowledge their presence. "Present, Your Honor," the attorney said. "We are ready to proceed." Judge Whitmore looked down at Marcus's file. Just another folder. Another name on the morning's long list. A routine violation. Charges or failure to notify probation officer of address change, she stated, her voice cool and controlled. "This is a direct breach of probation conditions, according to the terms agreed upon at sentencing." Naomi clenched her hands. Marcus said nothing. Judge Whitmore tapped her pen lightly on the folder, eyes moving quickly. No mention of military service. No details on housing instability. No notes about disability accommodations. To her, the man seated below was simply a case number. From the gallery, the two older veterans leaned forward slightly, watching. The attorney spoke. "Your Honor, Mr. Ellison's relocation was not intentional evasion. The building was sold abruptly. He had less than 5 days' notice. He attempted to notify the office, but the lines were down, and by the time he reached them, the violation had already been recorded." Judge Whitmore did not blink. Probation terms require pre-approval before any change of residence. Emergency or not, the law remains the law. Marcus kept his eyes on her face, unwavering. "I understand the legal concern," the attorney continued, "but I would ask the court to consider Mr. Ellison's circumstances in full context. He is a disabled combat veteran. His mobility is severely limited, and is he able to speak for himself?" Judge Whitmore asked. The attorney stepped back slightly. "Yes, Your Honor." Marcus nodded once. "Then let him," she said, turning the page. "But this is not a forum for sentiment. The law will remain the basis of this proceeding." With that, she gestured to Marcus. He inhaled slowly. His voice, when it came, was deep and even. "Yes, Your Honor. I can speak for myself." The room quieted. Even the clerks paused. Marcus looked directly at the bench, not with defiance, but with steady resolve. He would not plead. He would simply be heard. Marcus sat in the defendant's seat, hands resting on his knees, his cane propped gently against the table. Naomi sat beside him, eyes fixed on the judge. She held her breath as the court clerk stood to read the formal charges. Marcus Ellison, charged with violation of probation, specifically failure to notify his probation officer of a change in residence. As outlined in the probation agreement signed on September 15th, failure to report any change of address within 72 hours constitutes a direct breach. The words rang out like metal striking stone. Naomi glanced at her father, whose face remained calm, unmoved, but she knew the effort it took to maintain that stillness. Every syllable, each sterile phrasing, pressed against years of pride and perseverance. Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses. Is the defendant prepared to respond? Marcus's attorney rose. Yes, Your Honor. If I may. Whitmore raised a hand, stopping him. This court will allow the defendant to speak in due course. First, the record must be clear. Mr. Ellison, do you understand the charges brought against you? Marcus nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. And do you acknowledge that you changed your residence without prior approval? Yes, Marcus answered. But I had no other choice. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. That will be addressed when I call on you to explain. The courtroom was quiet. A man 2 rows behind Naomi shifted in his seat. A woman with a notepad scribbled quickly, her eyes darting between the judge and the defendant. Marcus's attorney stepped forward. With respect, Your Honor, Mr. Ellison was forced to leave his apartment due to the sale of the building. Tenants were given minimal notice. He did attempt to contact the probation office, but the timeline worked against him. Whitmore's voice stayed cold. Intentions do not negate violations. The law does not bend to accommodate hindsight. Naomi flinched. Marcus exhaled through his nose, lips pressed tight. This is not about intention, the attorney said. This is about context. Mr. Ellison is a veteran of the Iraq War. He suffers from permanent physical injuries and post-traumatic complications. He is not a flight risk. He is not a threat to society. He simply didn't have enough time. Whitmore closed the file. Her fingers drummed against the desk. This is a courtroom, she said flatly, not a theater of sympathy. If the defendant wishes to explain, he may do so now. Naomi leaned slightly toward her father, her voice barely a whisper. Just tell them what happened, Daddy. Marcus didn't answer her. His eyes remained fixed on the judge. He nodded once, slow and steady. I'll explain, he said. The clerk returned to his seat. A quiet hush fell across the gallery. Even the woman with the notepad lowered her pen. Marcus shifted forward in his seat. He did not look around the courtroom. He did not lower his voice or raise it for effect. He simply prepared to speak. Honestly, clearly, he was not here to win anyone over. He was here to be seen. Marcus took a steady breath, fingers curling slightly around the edge of the table. His voice, when it came, was low but clear, measured like each word was a step across fragile ground. Your Honor, I lived in a building on Holcomb Avenue for nearly 7 years. Same neighbors, same corner store, same routine. I didn't miss a check-in. Not once. Judge Whitmore stared back without expression. 2 months ago, we were given notice that the building had been sold. We had less than a week to leave. No extensions, no exceptions. It was gone just like that. His eyes flickered toward Naomi, whose hand gripped the fabric of her skirt. I tried calling my probation officer the morning we packed, Marcus continued, but the line rang and rang. When I finally got through 2 days later, they told me the system had already marked it as a violation. The judge said nothing. She didn't interrupt, didn't nod, didn't frown. She simply watched. I moved in with Naomi, he added, gesturing gently. It was the only place I could go. He paused. Your Honor, I wasn't hiding. I didn't disappear. I just didn't have a home for a few days. And when I did, I reported it. The room was still. The prosecutor shifted slightly, lips tight but saying nothing. Naomi leaned forward. He tried, ma'am. He really did. Whitmore's gaze shifted to her, briefly. This court recognizes the emotional burden, the judge said. But emotions are not evidence. Marcus didn't flinch. I understand. But I'm not here asking for pity. I just want the facts understood. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded stack of papers, printouts, envelopes, a receipt, and a dated voicemail transcription. His lawyer helped him slide them forward across the table. The call logs, the lease termination, the voicemail from the probation office, dated 3 days after I moved. Whitmore accepted the documents from the clerk without comment. Her eyes scanned the top page quickly. Your mobility limitations, how do they affect your ability to comply with check-ins? She asked, without looking up. Marcus answered without hesitation. I can move, but it takes time. I need help for stairs, and I rely on my daughter for most transportation. You live with her now? Yes. And you believe this move justified your delay in reporting? Marcus nodded. I don't just believe it. It's the truth. Whitmore set the documents down. You're still under probation for a prior incident involving prescription medication fraud. That offense remains on record. Marcus's jaw tightened. Yes, Your Honor. That happened during a very difficult time. I accepted responsibility for it. Naomi's voice was sharp but hushed. You were in pain and couldn't afford treatment. Marcus gently touched her arm. She fell quiet. He turned back to the bench. That was 3 years ago. I've complied with everything since. Until this. Whitmore glanced down again, then back up. The court will recess for 5 minutes before issuing a decision. The gavel struck once. Naomi leaned close, whispering, You did great, Daddy. Marcus gave her a tired smile. We're not done yet. From the gallery, quiet murmurs rose like distant wind. But in the heart of the courtroom, time had thickened. The weight of unbending law had yet to shift, and Marcus could feel it pressing on his shoulders. He had told his story, but telling it might not be enough. When the courtroom doors reopened, the murmurs fell into silence once more. Naomi and Marcus sat side by side at the defense table, her hand resting gently on his, fingers trembling just slightly. Judge Whitmore returned to the bench, her black robe flowing like a shadow behind her. All rise, the bailiff announced. Most in the courtroom stood. Naomi rose too, but Marcus did not. Judge Whitmore adjusted her glasses and looked down from the bench. Her voice, when it came, was firm and cold. Mr. Ellison, please stand for the reading of the court's decision. There was a pause. Naomi turned toward her father. His shoulders tensed. The cane resting by his seat seemed heavier than usual. Slowly he raised his head. Your Honor, he said quietly. I am physically unable to stand unassisted. There was a brief murmur from the gallery. The judge blinked once. You're stating you cannot rise at all? She asked. Marcus's tone remained calm. I suffered a spinal and hip injury from an explosion in Fallujah. I can stand with support, but it's difficult. Painful. Whitmore tapped her pen against the wood. You were able to enter the courtroom and be seated. I can walk slowly, but standing fully upright, I haven't done that in years. Her silence was loud. Marcus reached down and wrapped his hand around the cane. Naomi's eyes widened. Daddy, you don't have to. I do, he whispered. Then, with a breath drawn like armor, Marcus began to move. The gallery seemed to lean forward as one. Every eye fixed on him. His left foot braced against the floor, and his right knee trembled as he began to rise. His cane wobbled under his weight. His shoulders clenched tight. The scar across his neck pulsed visibly as he fought the pull of gravity and memory. First a partial lift, then a slow slide upward. Muscles shook. His jaw clenched. The courtroom fell into a silence so profound that even the air seemed still. Marcus stood, bent slightly forward, pain written across his face, but he stood. Naomi's hand flew to her mouth. She couldn't breathe. The clerk had frozen mid-typing. The prosecutor had turned his head, eyes fixed in disbelief. Judge Whitmore did not move. Her eyes narrowed, focused. She saw every inch of effort, every ounce of suffering, and every trace of pride. I just wanted, Marcus said, voice rough and low, to be seen, not as a name on a sheet, not as a mistake, not as a burden, just as a man. There were no gasps, no applause, only the sound of Marcus exhaling. The kind of breath someone takes when they have no more to prove, but everything to reclaim. Whitmore said nothing, but for the first time since he entered that courtroom, Marcus knew she was truly looking at him. Not past him. At him. The silence following Marcus's words stretched across the courtroom like a veil. No one moved. No one spoke. Naomi's hand remained over her mouth, her eyes wide, brimming with tears that refused to fall just yet. Marcus stood still, leaning heavily on his cane, each breath shallow but steady. His right leg trembled slightly, but he did not falter. He was not waiting for pity. He was not waiting for applause. He simply stood because it mattered to him. The court clerk had frozen, fingers hovering above her keyboard. The bailiff shifted his weight, as if unsure whether to intervene. Even the prosecutor, who had been shuffling papers earlier, now sat back in his chair, mouth drawn in a tight, unreadable line. Judge Whitmore remained at the bench, still as a sculpture. Her eyes were locked on Marcus, but something behind them had shifted. The steel in her expression had not melted, but it had cracked. A faint flicker of something human, unguarded, flicked in her gaze. She leaned forward just slightly, her hands folded on the bench. No one dared break the moment. Marcus exhaled slowly and began to lower himself back down, every motion deliberate, every muscle strained. Naomi reached out quickly, guiding him gently back into the chair. He let out a quiet grunt as he settled, sweat beading at his temple. She whispered, "Daddy, that was..." But she couldn't finish. He simply nodded, staring straight ahead. Whitmore cleared her throat softly. It was the only sound in the room. She looked down at the file in front of her, then back up. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but still carried the weight of authority. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "the court acknowledges your effort." Marcus said nothing. Whitmore glanced at Naomi, then at the gallery. Her fingers twitched against the bench as if unsure of their purpose. "Court will resume in 5 minutes," she announced abruptly. "Recess." She stood, turned, and disappeared behind the curtain, her black robe trailing after her like smoke. No one moved, not right away. Naomi looked around, realizing for the first time that nearly every person in the gallery had tears in their eyes or wet cheeks. A man in uniform sat near the back, hands clenched into fists on his lap. Another woman, elderly and stoic, wiped her eyes with a wrinkled tissue. A reporter in the corner lowered her phone, her mouth slightly open, speechless. Then, slowly, the room began to breathe again. Naomi turned to her father. "Do you want water? I can go get some." Marcus shook his head. "Just stay." She nodded and placed her hand over his once more. His grip was firm. The 5 minutes passed in silence, but it was no longer the cold, bureaucratic kind. This silence had warmth, carried weight. It held truth. When Judge Whitmore returned to the bench, her pace was slower. And though her expression had returned to its usual neutrality, something in her carriage had changed. The next words she spoke would not be the same as the ones she might have spoken before Marcus stood. The courtroom, once again in session, sat quieter than before, though the silence now felt like reverence. Judge Whitmore took her seat, her fingers brushing the edges of Marcus's file, as if it no longer fit the narrative she had assumed. She stared at the papers for a long moment. Then she lifted her eyes to Marcus, who sat with his back straight despite the pain still etched in his face. "The court acknowledges the statement and demonstration made by Mr. Ellison," she said. "It has been noted." Her voice was composed, but not cold. The difference was subtle, softer, less mechanical. The kind of shift you only noticed when you'd heard the same cadence for years. She paused, glancing at the gallery as if becoming aware, for the first time, that she was not speaking only to the defendant. Then something unexpected happened. Judge Whitmore stood. A murmur rippled through the room, stifled quickly by the presence of the bailiff. But Naomi felt her breath catch. This woman never left the bench during a session. Never stepped down unless a case was over. But now Whitmore was walking, slowly, deliberately, down the narrow steps and toward the defendant's table. Marcus didn't flinch. His gaze stayed level, his body still except for the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. She stopped just short of the railing. "Mr. Ellison," she said, quieter now. "Thank you for standing." The words were simple, but coming from her, they rang with an impact that stunned the room. Naomi blinked rapidly, unsure if she had heard right. Marcus raised his chin slightly but said nothing. Whitmore continued, her eyes on his. "It is easy to let systems process people. Files move, dockets grow. But you reminded me, that behind every file is a life." A few people in the gallery shifted, the emotional weight thickening. She looked down briefly, then back up. This court is not here to make judgments that ignore reality. Behind her, the clerk subtly wiped her cheek. The prosecutor avoided eye contact with everyone. Marcus finally spoke. "I'm not asking for anything. I just want to be seen." "You have been," Whitmore said. A rustle came from the back of the room. A tall man in an old military jacket stood up, hand resting at his side as he stared at Marcus. The judge turned slightly to glance at him but said nothing. Naomi leaned in, whispering, "Who is that?" Marcus narrowed his eyes, recognition flickering. But he remained quiet. The man didn't speak, only nodded once. His lips pressed into a firm line. The tension in the room was no longer confrontation. It had transformed into something deeper. Respect, understanding, and a mutual acknowledgement that none of this was simple. That justice was not always in the letter of the law, but in the space between the lines. Judge Whitmore returned to her seat, slower this time. She adjusted the microphone and spoke. "This hearing will proceed, but the court will weigh all factors, including those not captured in official documentation." Marcus relaxed, if only slightly. Naomi squeezed his hand. The veteran in the back remained standing, his eyes fixed on Marcus. And though the case was not yet over, the room no longer felt like a trap. It felt like truth was finally being heard. A quiet stillness hung in the air after Judge Whitmore resumed her place on the bench. Papers were shuffled, motions whispered, but no one dared disturb the weight of what had just happened. Then, the man in the military jacket stepped forward. He looked to be in his early 60s, white hair shaved close, face weathered from years under foreign suns. He moved with a limp and wore the expression of someone who had seen enough of war to know its cost. "Your Honor," he said, his voice gravelly yet clear. "Permission to address the court." Judge Whitmore hesitated. This was not standard procedure. But her eyes found Marcus, who looked up at the man with recognition slowly dawning. "State your name," she said. "Calvin Rhodes, United States Marine Corps, retired." She gave a slight nod. "Proceed, Mr. Rhodes." Calvin turned to face the gallery, then back to Marcus. "I served with this man in Fallujah, 2004. It was hell. I watched a lot of good men break under it. But Marcus Ellison didn't." Marcus looked down, jaw tight. "I remember the day it happened," Calvin continued. "We were clearing a compound. He spotted a wire running along the wall, improvised explosive. Without hesitation, he shoved me down and turned away, shielding the rest of us." A hush spread over the room. Calvin's voice cracked. "He took the blast. Should have died. They told us at the med station he might not make it. But he did. And he never asked for medals. Never asked for praise. Just wanted to come home." Marcus kept his gaze low. Naomi stared at Calvin, tears brimming. "I wouldn't be standing here if not for him," Calvin said. "A lot of us wouldn't." He turned to the judge. "I just thought, if you're going to judge this man today, you should know who he really is." For a long moment, Judge Whitmore didn't respond. She looked down at Marcus's file again, an impersonal sheet of paper that held nothing of the man sitting before her. Then another voice rose from the gallery. "I remember that name," said an older black woman seated near the back. "I saw it in the veterans' newsletter. Hero of Fallujah." Then another. "I served with his brother in Kandahar. Said Marcus was the bravest of them all." More murmurs followed. A few veterans in the room nodded solemnly. One gave a silent salute. Naomi looked around, overwhelmed by the sudden chorus of voices that rose, not in defense of a defendant, but in honor of a man. It was no longer a courtroom. It had become a space of memory, of witness, of truth unburied. Marcus finally looked up at Calvin. Their eyes met. "You remember all that?" Marcus asked softly. Calvin smiled. "Some things you don't forget." Judge Whitmore took it all in. For once, she didn't try to suppress what was unfolding. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, letting it wash over the room. No ruling had yet been made, but everyone present understood one thing now. This man had not come here to escape accountability. He had come here to be seen. And finally, after years of being overlooked, forgotten, or reduced to paperwork, Marcus Ellison stood in a courtroom surrounded by people who remembered exactly who he was. The courtroom had fallen into a reverent quiet. Judge Deborah Whitmore sat still for a long while, the weight of what had just transpired pressing against the stern lines of her face. In front of her, Marcus Ellison sat composed but weary, his cane resting across his lap, his breathing steady though strained. Finally, she spoke. "This courtroom," she said, her voice even, "is a place of law, a place of procedure. But today it has also become something more, a place of truth." She picked up the file again, the one labeled with Marcus's name in standard black ink. She turned it over, closed it, and placed it aside. "The charge before us concerns a technical violation, a failure to report a change of address. Under most circumstances, this court would uphold the probation violation and impose the appropriate penalty." Naomi's heart pounded. Her hand slid into her father's. Judge Whitmore continued, "But this is not most circumstances. What this court has heard is a complete picture. A man who served with distinction, endured profound hardship, and did not, in fact, attempt to evade his responsibility, but was failed by a system too slow to see his humanity." She paused, then looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Ellison, this court dismisses the probation violation in full." Gasp sounded. Naomi squeezed her father's hand as tears spilled from her eyes. Marcus closed his eyes and bowed his head. Not in defeat, but in peace. The judge wasn't finished. "I am also ordering an immediate review of our probation reporting procedures, specifically in relation to disabled and elderly veterans. This court cannot undo what you've endured, but it will not contribute further to it." She stood slowly. "You may go in peace, Mr. Ellison." For a moment no one moved. Then, from the back of the gallery, the same veteran who had spoken before raised his voice. "Present arms." Every veteran in the room, one by one, stood and saluted. The sound of heels clicking together echoed against the marble walls. Naomi helped her father rise from his seat. He used his cane not to prove anything this time, but simply to move forward. They walked together down the aisle of the courtroom, heads turning, strangers nodding in silent respect. As they reached the exit, a young law clerk opened the door for them. He didn't speak. He just stepped aside and lowered his head. Outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. Marcus paused at the top, breathing in deeply. Naomi looked up at him, pride and relief etched into her face. "You okay, Dad?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." Reporters waited nearby, unsure whether to approach. Spectators filed out slowly, still murmuring about what they had witnessed. Some wiped their eyes. Others stood in place, as if reluctant to let the moment end. But Marcus didn't need their cameras. He didn't need their headlines. He had come to speak his truth, and he had been heard. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a shadow walking through someone else's system. He felt whole. He felt seen.